Joining us right now, Republican Congressman from the free state of Maryland and a good friend of our show, Representative Andy Harris. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Well, now another friend of our show is the D.C. Councilmember Muriel Bowser, who, of course, is the Democratic nominee for mayor. And, Congressman, you've been in a little bit of a war of words here with Mayor Vincent Gray over your actions in trying to modify the district's law decriminalizing marijuana. So earlier this week, was it yesterday?
Yes.
So we had Muriel Bowser on, and she had this to say.
Well, we are counting on the Democrats in the Senate to make sure that never happens. And obviously, we know what's happening when you have Republican lawmakers who can't get legislation through for their own states, are using the District of Columbia as their playground, basically, so that they can make a name for themselves in the Congress and at home.
I think she's talking about you, Congressman.
I can't imagine that because she should know. I don't. Well, maybe she doesn't know the rules in Maryland. I don't have a vote on Maryland policy. I only have a vote on federal policy, which includes oversight of the District of Columbia. And their marijuana decriminalization law was terribly written. It doesn't do what the people who come up with decriminalization standards know. You have to treat teenagers differently than full-grown adults. That law does nothing to treat teenagers differently. It's going to result in higher teen drug use, both marijuana and subsequently other drugs. And that's the last thing D.C. needs. She ought to know much better than that.
Congressman Harris, earlier this week, Tommy Wells, another council member, said that he's proposed a pretty expansive education program and advertising program that will reach out and specifically to the youth and say that marijuana is bad for you. It's not a good idea. Even though it's being decriminalized, the district does not condone this behavior and doesn't recommend it. Is that a step in the right direction in your mind?
Look, the district, of course, condones the behavior when it decriminalizes it for teenagers. It's a first small step in the right direction. What you have to do is you have to provide therapy and counseling for 14 and 15-year-olds who get caught with an ounce of marijuana. I'm not talking about setting a criminal record. I'm talking about doing the common sense thing, which is counsel them about the harms of marijuana. That's the big difference between Maryland's decriminalization law and other state decriminalization laws, and even their legalization law. The penalty is different and higher for minors in Colorado and Washington who have full legalization.
All right, so you have proposed that the district not be able to spend any money it gets from the federal government to enforce the marijuana laws. Is that correct? Is that basically...
No, or their own money.
Or their own money.
Full oversight.
All right, so that's your proposal. And then other Republicans, and I would imagine you were on board with this, I don't know for sure, have suggested that no federal money be used to enforce the gun laws that are, many people say, burdensome in the District of Columbia. I think they are. You know, I'm with you on both of those issues. But I have a little heartburn when Congress gets involved in the day-to-day operation of the district officials and take away the power that the elected officials who were voted into office by the people who live in the District of Columbia. So, I mean, is this the right way to go?
Look, those elected officials have power only because Congress gave them some limited power, because the Constitution sets out very clearly that Congress has oversight. And marijuana use by teenagers, I wouldn't call that day-to-day running of the district. That's a major policy decision for the district. I think they got it all wrong. They ought to revisit the thing. I said publicly, if their law had looked like Maryland's law, I wouldn't be doing this. But basically, they have fully legalized marijuana for 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds with no penalty whatsoever, for all intents and purposes. Because, honestly, you ought to look at they just published the regulation in the form the police are going to use. There are two infractions on it: littering and marijuana possession. Littering is a $75 ticket. Marijuana possession is a $25 ticket. So I have to tell the teenager, keep the joint in your hand, because if you throw it on the ground, the penalty is 3 times higher.
All right, Congressman Harris, while we've got you, hey, listen, another major issue that I know that you feel passionately about is this border crisis, all of these unaccompanied children pouring across our border. It's obviously going to become it's already becoming a huge strain on our nation, on our budget. I mean, let's face it, we can't afford to give health care and give basic care and feeding and housing to many American citizens, and now we're being forced to do it for non-citizens who enter our country illegally. Their first act as a resident of our nation is to break our laws. What are we going to do about it? What is Congress going to do about it? And what do you think of your governor, Governor O'Malley, saying that he wants to be able to welcome all these kids, but not in the state of Maryland? Is there hypocrisy there?
Look, that's the typical liberal hypocrisy. Look, I get it. Mr. O'Malley's running for president. I understand he wants to run to the left of even the president, which I didn't think there was any room on that. But, the bottom line is, Governor O'Malley said, well, you're sending them to certain death. I got to tell the governor, he ought to look at the murder statistics for Detroit, Michigan. They're actually higher than Honduras and Guatemala. So doesn't he think we ought to take care of the children in Detroit first before we take care of the children in Honduras and Guatemala? And if he thinks it's certain death for these illegal children to be here or to send them back from being here, then what does he think about what's going on in a place like Detroit or in Baltimore when he was mayor, when the murder rate was higher than Honduras and Guatemala at the time?
Well, you're a medical doctor, and you have no doubt read the stories of these kids from the border are coming in with some pretty horrific diseases that are not a problem currently in the United States. As a medical professional, as well as a member of Congress, do you have concerns about that?
I do, especially about some of them. We hear about, scabies and lice. Both of those are treatable in a relatively short period of time. But what I'm really worried about are diseases like tuberculosis, which, of course, if you're diagnosed with it, you have to be on medication for a year. And, so you'd need a fairly long quarantine period, I think, before you'd safely say that someone was not infectious. So we just don't know the truth. HHS and the administration are just being very tight-lipped about the health problems. We can't get answers. The press can't get answers. I always worry when you can't get answers from the administration, they're trying to hide something. They just ought to come clean. Look, what's the incidence of serious diseases like tuberculosis in these children who are now crossing the border and who the president has agreed to keep here for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, pending a hearing on repatriation to their home countries.
Representative Andy Harris is our guest, Republican of Maryland. And Congressman, while we've got you, it's been, about 20 hours now since news of that downed Malaysian airliner over Ukraine. And there's starting to be growing calls for the administration to say something other than the 40 seconds we got from the president yesterday before he launched into his regular stump speech, hammering Republicans in Congress. What do you want the administration to do or say about this incident?
Well, first of all, they'll never admit they screwed up on the policy with regards to Ukraine and Russia in the first place. If they had come down hard, as Mr. McCain said yesterday, and had given the Ukrainian government the weapons and the support it needed to repel the pro-Soviet Eastern Ukrainian forces, that missile launcher wouldn't have been in the Eastern Ukraine. And the bottom line is it's just another example of failed administration policy. I suspect they're going to try to all under the rug. They'll probably blame this on the Republicans, too. I mean, why not? But it's it's a heartbreaking, just a horrendous thing that went on. It should shock the entire world community. And hopefully when the United Nations meets this morning, that's the conclusion they're going to come to. And I hope there are just tremendous sanctions against Russia for providing the training, because this launcher might have come from the Ukrainian forces captured by the pro-Soviet forces, but they had to have Russian training this is not a shoulder-fired rocket launcher. This requires training to accomplish its mission.
All right, Representative Andy Harris of Maryland, thank you so much for joining us, as always, sir.